Some years ago, I was struck by the large number of falsehoods that I had accepted as true in my childhood, and by the highly doubtful nature of the whole edifice that I had subsequently based on them. I realized that it was necessary, once in the course of my life, to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundations if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last. René Descartes. How do you know what's true? This quote reminds us all that through the course of one's life, you're bound to hear a falsehood or a lie. This unit will look at the philosophical question of how one gains knowledge and what is truth. There are two types of truth. There's necessary truth. This is truth that cannot possibly be false. This comes from a priori knowledge, which is truth understood before an experience. Then there's empirical truth. Now, this is a matter of fact that can be shown to be true or false. This comes from a posteriori, which is truth gained through one's senses and experiences. With empirical or factual truth, here's an example. There are no rabbits in Antarctica. Well, we can decide and research and find out if there are. Although no human permanently dwells in Antarctica, it just so happens that many species of animals have been transplanted there, such as the rabbit. Then there's the necessary truth, such as 2 + 2 = 4. Necessary truths cannot possibly be false, nor can we imagine circumstances in which they might be false. Then there is contingent truth. Contingent actually means an empirical statement which can be truth or false. What we do is find the facts that can prove a statement to be a contingent truth or a contingent falsehood. Some beliefs in our life are not strictly necessary or empirical truth, such as the belief of God. That's an example of interpretation of certain facts, not just the facts themselves. It requires a level of faith. People can have a preconceived mindset which affects their interpretation of the facts. For existence, with God's existence, if you were raised as a believer, then you have a tendency to believe in God, as you see in the theist proof over on the left column. However, if you were raised as a non-believer, then you have the tendency to have the atheist reply, which is the column on the right. There are basically then two schools of thought. There's empiricism, which is that knowledge that is derived from experience and experimentation, like through our five senses. Then there's also rationalism. Now, rationalism is derived from reason and logic, such as in mathematics. Here are some names you need to know. You need to know that rationalism is knowledge that's based on reason. And some of the continental rationalists that we will study will be René Descartes, whose quote we started with, Baruch Spinoza from Holland, Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz from Germany. Then in the 19th century, the more modern philosophers would be Immanuel Kant and George or G.W.F. Hegel, both from Germany. Then there are the empirical philosophers. Remember, empiricism means that knowledge, what you know to be true, is based on experience from your senses. We have some British empiricists, such as John Locke, Bishop George Berkeley of Ireland, and David Hume from Scotland. The more recent empiricists would be John Stuart Mill from England and Bertrand Russell from England. Let's talk about what it means to be innate. One of the main controversies between a rationalist and an empiricist concerns the existence of innate ideas. Now, those are ideas that are basically born into us. But this does not mean, what would be absurd, that newborns already know that 437 multiplied by 73 equals 31,901. Babies don't just know that, and they haven't acquired the language to even express that. Rationalists generally accept the idea of innate ideas, but empiricists who believe everything must be learned through one's five senses usually reject the idea of innate. Now, Descartes was a rationalist, and he tried to begin with intuitive truths as the idea that God is a perfect being, and then he tried to deduce other truths that would be equally certain. But John Locke was an empiricist, and he rejected this idea of innate because our minds are blank tablets at birth. That's what John Locke said. Those blank tablets at birth are which we have all of our ideas must be derived from. No one has an innate or inborn idea, according to John Locke. The problem here is that all of our knowledge does not consist of individual perceptions, like here's a coffee cup. Much is based on universal statements such as, you've heard this one I'm sure, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. How do we get from our individual perceptions and our limited experience to these universal claims? The rationalist insists that it's only by the way of some innate idea or rational intuition that it's possible, and that the most necessary truths about the world could not possibly be based on experience. They must be based on our innate ideas. Now let's talk about the presuppositions of knowledge. A presupposition is simply a principle that's assumed for whatever everyone else believes. This actually brings up the principle of universal causality. Now, this means the fact that everything has a cause. An example would be an auto mechanic. You drive in your car and he says, well, it doesn't start. Then he says, oh, well, nothing's wrong. This is just one of those things that happens to cars without a cause. You wouldn't take that. You would just turn around and go to another mechanic because you believe that something is causing your car not to start. Another example would be a lawyer who presupposes that the justice court is aimed at justice and has some idea what is just. Now, there are some people, though, who are very skeptical about things. Each of us knows the world from our own perspective and through our own personal experience. The empiricist and the rationalist would agree that what we know directly is first of all our own idea and sensation from the five basic senses. But these ideas and sensations are in our mind. Now, the world obviously is outside of our mind. It is an external world. And we assume naturally that our ideas correspond to the things in the world. But how do we know that what we believe in our mind is really true in the world? That is called skepticism, to question. Skeptics believe in a two-world assumption. There is the external world, that is the house that this woman is seeing, and then there's the internal world that is inside her mind. Now, if anything's going to be true, it must be true by reference of the facts and the objects. This is what we call truth of reason. But according to the two-world assumption, what we know directly are our own mind's ideas and our own worldly experiences, not the physical whole world. We've never all been to every part of the world. This is why it's possible for us to imagine without changing anything that the world might not exist or that we are now just dreaming. Some great philosophers have believed that we are really living in a dream world. One of the skeptics was René Descartes himself. This philosopher is best known for his deliberations about all of this, and he was, again, a French philosopher. He was so concerned by proving his beliefs to be true that he decided to quit believing everything. This is called Descartes' method of doubt. Descartes' method of doubt remains another heated debate in the argument of modern philosophy. He basically concluded that there are only two things that he could prove existed. He proved that he existed, and he also gave proof that God existed. Another skeptic is David Hume, the English philosopher that I mentioned briefly before. How much of what we believe is merely personal opinion? And how many of our beliefs do we share only with our family and friends, but not with the larger universal world? Which of our beliefs might generally be accepted in society and not by other people? You see, David Hume was that English philosopher, and he also was the member of an Anglican church. But even though he was a member of church, he questioned the existence of God and what made one faith right for everyone. Because he questioned God and proclaimed to be an atheist, even though he was a member of a church, he was never allowed to teach at the university level, as many philosophers were. He contributed what we now call Hume's fork, which is a visual description, and he believed that every justifiable true statement has two prongs or two realities. There is the truth of reason, which is the a priori reason and the necessary truth, and then there is the matter of fact, which is the a posteriori or the contingent truth that can be proven. This exclusive nature of facts and experiences seemingly appear innocent in the two-world assumption, but it can lead one to skepticism. There comes along the resolution of skepticism by Immanuel Kant. Now remember, he was the German philosopher, and he was proclaimed the victor over the skeptics. He denied the two-world assumption. He said that our experiences and the real world are not separate. The world we know is just the world of our experience. The mind imposes its own form and categories on our experience. This causes our presupposition of knowledge. These presuppositions are not empirical, and nor are they necessary truth. Immanuel Kant causes our mental presuppositions of truth synthetic a priori. So what about truth from science, though? Many people look to science for truth, and the empiricists and the rationalists both tend to be scientists. Skeptics defend their skepticism as scientific, and religious critics do not usually reject science, they just question some particular theory. So, does science hold the exclusive right to the honorable word of truth? How do we find truth then? There are several truth theories that are in this branch of philosophy. There's the correspondence theory, the coherence theory, and the pragmatic theory of truth. First, the correspondence theory. This theory of truth says that a statement or belief is true if and only if it corresponds to the facts. Like you see here, the cat is on the mat. With our eyes, we physically see that. Even this common sense theory, though, gets into trouble as soon as we pick out what corresponds to what. Think about words that we use today. Linguistics and word meanings change from generation to generation. Here are some examples. Give me the clue. Many of you may think of the word clue as that reason that you're given in the game of Clue, a little hint. In reality, clue, or spelled C-L-E-W, originally meant a ball of yarn. How about the phrase, she is a hussy? You see from the picture there's a provocatively dressed woman. Did you realize the word hussy originally meant an English word that simply described a housewife? Every housewife was considered and called hussy at one point. How about the phrase, I am gay? Well, today we visualize the rainbow flag, and you may immediately think of the LGBT community with the word gay. Originally, gay simply meant happy and joyful, as pictured with this young girl. So we must be careful what corresponds to what, as in these words and their meanings. The second theory of truth is the coherence theory of truth. This theory says that a statement or belief is true if and only if it coheres with a statement or a system of beliefs. For instance, you see in the center of this diagram that the cat is on the mat, but that has to correspond and cohere and be truthful with the cat is not on the porch, the mat is covered by something, I do have a cat, there's a gray spot in the corner. As you can see, there are many different statements of coherence. The problem with this is that our evidence is always incomplete because we don't know everything. The beliefs that we already accept are not always sufficient to allow us to know with certainty new truth. Then lastly, there's the pragmatic theory of truth. This theory says that a statement or belief is true if and only if it works. That means it allows us to predict certain results or functions in everyday life, and it encourages further inquiry to help us lead better lives. The pragmatists only view truth as anything beneficial. But what about discoveries which may be before their time or will lead to benefit in the future? Good question. Confucius said, "To know what you know and what you do not know, that is true knowledge." And that Eastern philosopher, Confucius, may have had something going on. Now let's go ahead and talk about how truth can be subjective and it can be relative to the individual person. You see, different people in different societies tie their experiences and lives together in very different ways. Their truth, quote unquote, may seem different from ours. Does this mean that we're forced to accept any system, no matter how bizarre it may seem to us, as true? Here is a popular saying that implies that the tone of one's voice can add to the truth. It's not always what you say, but how you say it. The objective truth is independent of personal opinion, but subjective truth is that which is true for the person who believes it and not necessarily to everyone. An example of subjective truth could be that paranoid person whose view of the world is true just for him, but it may not be really true of the whole world. Relativism is defined as the fact that what's true for one person may not necessarily be true for all people. Some people's ideas seem ridiculous to us, and this emphasizes the fact that truth may not be as straightforward as the world really is. Two people, as in this photograph, can see the exact same thing, and one can say it's true, but the other say it's false. Two people can look at the same thing and see it differently. What great philosopher said that? Good old Justin Bieber. Our understanding depends on coherence and contextual appropriateness. An example of this is, how does society impose ethics? Michel Foucault is a French philosopher, and he argued that truth can be an historical matter, which is relative to time and place. Foucault insisted that the interpretation of truth and perspectives are imposed on us by the culture and by the discourse itself. Take, for instance, how a woman is viewed in the workplace. Here is a graphic. One person may be telling that woman to think like a man and act like a boss. But on the other hand, someone else is thinking, oh, she's just so bossy. And you will see the other reasons given there as well. It can be society imposing ethics on a person, and those can be a mixed signal. Friedrich Nietzsche introduced the notion of will to power, and Foucault agreed with him. The idea is that we are always motivated by the desire for power. That causes us to assert our positions as truth. This is called self-assertion. Foucault went so far as to say that the truth is what the powerful in society declare it to be. German philosopher Jürgen Habermas disagreed with both Foucault and Nietzsche. He had a more modest approach. Habermas said that the discourse or the discussion is something that we do. He viewed it more as an interpersonal relation, not simply that was something that was imposed on us as laws. Habermas said that through conversation and debate, we can determine truth and cultivate rationality. Habermas further said, from a moral point of view, there is no excuse for terrorist acts, regardless of the motive or the situation under which they are carried out. He believed this because he thought everyone should be willing to sit down and have a discussion. The discussion, it's sometimes called the dialect method. It is the discourse between two or more people holding different points of view about a subject. But these two or more people really do wish to establish the truth through some reasoned argument. Dialect was first popularized by Plato when discussing Socrates. Habermas returned our thinking to this old Greek idea of dialectic, which literally means conversation. This idea retains the faith that through conversation one can still talk meaningfully of truth and knowledge. Willard Van Orman Quine said, "As an empiricist, I continue to think of the conceptual scheme of science as a tool, ultimately, for predicting future experiences in light of my past experience." You see, he was an American philosopher, and he presented yet another approach to this relative truth or relativism. Now, Quine was a Harvard professor who considered himself an empiricist. However, he challenged the idea that truth is only based on facts. His premise was that how we put these facts together does not necessarily settle the matter of truth. We all put those facts together slightly differently. So what is the truth then? Given any set of facts, there are a number of different truth theories which could accurately describe a situation. So let me let you consider the following. What do you see when you look at this screen? It looks like it could be taken back in the early 1900s possibly. A nice quiet street with a few antique cars parked. How do you get that? Look again at this street. What one sees may not always include the facts or the true nature. In the first photo, what did you see? Yes, those cars along a street. But guess what? It was just created by the circumstances of this second photo. Oh, isn't this sweet? A little child underneath a giant leaf trying to use it like an umbrella in the rain. Oh, this is what's really happening. Mom and Sis are creating a special Kodak photo moment. Was this what you expected when you saw the first visual image? And how about this one? This photograph actually was published in Time magazine in the year 2018. Time magazine quoted that this was an immigrant child who had been dragged screaming and weeping from her parents. The truth of the matter is, the leg in the denim jeans standing next to that child is that child's mother. The khaki pants were a border officer who was talking to this mother. Time has now revealed that they published this in error. The little girl was simply crying, well, because she was tired and hungry, while her mother was standing right beside her, very close and safe, speaking to the border guard. As Oscar Wilde said, The truth is rarely pure and it's never simple. So keep this in mind and consider this quote as we close out our discussion on epistemology, or the philosophy of truth.